Sherri, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. Jerry and I are so honored to have you on and so looking forward to this discussion about your great new book, Rooted to Rise, but also just your incredible career in coaching.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you today. I enjoy the work that you guys do and appreciate all the services you provide to athletes and coaches and teams and entities everywhere.
Well, thank you so much. When we first came across your work and were recommended your book, and I looked up more to learn more about you, and I'm like, okay, here's a coach and 500 wins and Final Fours and Coach of the Year stuff. This was not the book I was expecting, and but it's so good because it's a book about the things that Jerry and I talk about all the time, which is people and influence and relationships. Yeah, tell us what and you write on your website, this was the first book I wanted to write. And I'm just wondering, like, was a publisher like, wait, what about the how-to book or whatever?
You know, when I left coaching, I ran toward the idea of being able to write and create, something that I've always loved to do. But when you're coaching a major college basketball program, you don't have a lot of time to do that. And I always knew I wanted to write, but I also always knew I wouldn't write the book that people expected me to write.
Mhm.
I have no desire to write a how-to. I don't think I have the market cornered on anything.
Mhm.
Experience has taught me a lot, but that's not a book that lived within my soul. And
Mhm.
um, this is not necessarily a book that I set out to write. It's a book that just sort of came out of me.
Mhm.
From the start of COVID, I began to write more because I had more confined time, as many of us found kind of that thing that makes our heart sing, out of default because we couldn't do what we were supposed to be doing or we thought we were supposed to be doing. And I reignited that relationship with the written word and the spinning of a sentence. And I just sat down daily and wrote, and this is what came out. And
Mm.
so I have that disclaimer at the front, which my editor said is really odd because usually disclaimers come at the end. And I said, no, I want it right out there in the front that this is not the top 50 most influential people in my life. It's
Yeah.
not the 10 best players I ever coached. There's not even a story about my mother in it, for heaven's sake,
Uh-huh.
a central character in my life. I mean, it was just a collection of stories that stuck in my head and I thought had some sort of a universal appeal that people could relate to. And I wrapped them all around the metaphor of the redwood tree, which was my opening lecture, quote unquote, for my team every year at the start of every season, that we had to reach out and hold each other up. That's how we were going to be our best selves and how we were going to thrive.
Well, I know we were just chatting before we hit record here, and I know Jerry wants to jump in because the redwood has significant meaning for me in my life, and certainly for Jerry and his. So, Jerry, jump in because what is it about the redwood that speaks to you?
Well, when I got your book, you know, we get a lot of books, and I knew just looking at the cover, this is going to be a different book, and it is in many ways. And may I add, you're really a good writer.
Thank you.
Yeah, you write well, and I think one of us, John or I, we want to read a passage if we have your permission
Mm.
at some
Sure.
point here, because it really is emblematic of your writing, but also who you are and what you do and everything else. But I live here in Santa Cruz SC, which happens to be your initials, which is really weird. But I live in Santa Cruz. I go up there every day into the mountain, into the hills. It's a mile and a half from my home, and I bike and hike and I run up on those trails in the redwoods. And I've written many books, and that's where my ideas come from. And I'm looking at this book, and I'm looking at it, and already, it gives me thoughts and ideas, and just being in the sacred space of those redwoods, it's magical, isn't it? It's a special kind of tree which does something that many trees don't do. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit why you chose the redwood. It just seems like these gentle giants demonstrate your message so well.
Yeah, it was a great fit. As I mentioned, I used to tell that story to my team at the start of every season, partly because of the sacred space that you just described. I've always believed that team is sacred and that locker room is a sacred space. And so when we started to talk about what would be required to sustain that sacred nature of that space, qualities of the redwood come to the top. And so we, with our teams, would often talk about the fact that we are there for each other. And when the storms come and adversity arises, we must hold one another up, and that we feed one another and sustain one another. But as I began to write the book, at the beginning, this was not, Rooted to Rise was not the title. And working with the publisher said, "Are you married to the title?" I had a working title. I said, "I'm not even sure we're going steady. Let's have a conversation." And so we did. And she began to ask me about the commonality of the stories that I provided. Like, what is the thread? What is the central thread that binds them all together? And I said to her, "It's like the redwood trees, you know?" And I told the story, and she said, "Your title is in there." And I went to bed and woke up the next day and rearranged the stories and divided the sections. It was all there. It just needed to sort of be coerced to the surface. And I found in my research a little, just a layer deeper than I had gone before, the parts of the redwood tree that so perfectly fit the stories of my book. The goose pens, which was the place where Native Americans used to put their animals to protect them. The idea that redwood trees produce their own water. They produce their own sustenance by taking in fog and turning it into liquid that sustains them when it's dry. The fact that they're the most diverse inhabitants in all of nature. They are home to more different types of species than any other tree. And those things just fit perfectly with the types of stories, the people that had so impacted me in my life. And it just sort of fell into place from there.
Mm. I love it. So, Jerry's in Santa Cruz. I live in Oregon. One of my favorite places to camp is the redwoods on the Oregon-California border there. And I'm fascinated by trees and forests and love the woods and love the mountains and things like that. And so it's a metaphor that hits very close to home for me as well. You're Well, let me just dive into the book, and I'm going to read that passage right away. And this is about your kitchen, and you call it that you notice it still, the gravitational pull of the kitchen. When friends come to our house, no matter where the party starts, the kitchen is where we always end up. We've mended hearts while huddled on the counter, untangled messes while sitting on the brick paver floor, created roads where there weren't any while leaning against the fridge. Our kitchen is where hard things get tackled and where big dreams get hatched, take root, and grow. Maybe it's the possibility place in every home, or maybe it just seems sacred to me because I still feel Granny there. Either way, it's where our family's heart beats loudest, the avenue through which our house became our home. Such is the soul of kitchen hubs that nourish both our bodies and our souls. And I love that. And when we were coming up with questions, I told Jerry I wanted to ask that because that speaks to me and my family as well. My mom was a chef, and I spent so much time in the kitchen growing up, first being forced to learn how to cook. But then it was the center of our family because when we would have holidays and meals, we would all jump in, we would all cook, we would all prepare them. And that's carried over to my own children as well and my own family today. So, but I think that line speaks to not only the beauty of your writing, but that the importance of this sacred place. The locker room is kind of the kitchen of your team, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that you pulled that passage. I just want to say thank you for that. I'm not on any podcast or any book signing I've done has anyone read that passage or referred to it. So that's pretty cool. Thank you for finding that in there. What's ironic is I'm a terrible cook. I'm awful. I mean, awful by choice, I think, but probably by nature as well. But I was, from the time my kids were tiny, I was the head women's basketball coach at the University of Oklahoma. I didn't really have time to cook, much less go to the grocery store to get the ingredients that would be needed to do so. So it's kind of funny. And yet that is the spot. It was the spot when I was growing up, as my granny was a cook. And that's where we always migrated to. But it's still the spot in our home, regardless of who prepares the food or, where we bring it in from. It's where everyone tends together. And I think there is a sacredness to the space. I can see certain players through the years in my mind as you read that passage, them sitting on a cabinet or huddled in the floor when they were falling apart about something. That's where we went to try to put it back together and solve a problem, and where we gathered in mass when, team is struggling and we got to get this thing figured out. They'd come over to my house, and that's where we go, and that's where we do that. So it was sort of by virtue of being my home, an extension of our team's home. And it is a place, I think, for whatever reason, where you feel like you can fix things. You feel like you just get the right ingredients in there, you can make something good. And I think you feel that regardless of whether or not you're a chef or not.
Yeah. And I think that, so Jerry, of all the amazing coaches that we have spoken to on this podcast and gotten to know, that sort of, when things are at their worst, they all tend to sort of, there's something like that, like come over to the house and let's like go right to our roots and get it right. Right. And how often that starts with like a meal and sharing that bond and camaraderie and love that so many of us, hopefully had with families, kind of strips away all the false stuff and the things we deal with now and just says, all right, come on, like we're people and we all need to get along, right?
Yeah. Let me just jump in here for a second, John and Sherri. The image that comes to my mind is when you're in the kitchen, you're digesting food, but really it's a place to digest so much more. And, so many of the things that you talk about in this book, and we want to get to those too as well, the truths that you talk about, the way you write this, it's amazing. And so, yeah, it's a sacred place and the truths are discussed, but it's a place like the Redwoods too, because there are intersections, out in that forest. What amazes me is how the root from a tree 50 feet away is on my trail, and it spreads out, and it's a place. A redwood grove is a place where trees gather. It's a gathering place like a kitchen, and it comes together, and there's an intersection of energies, just like in the kitchen that you described. And John, you mentioned the word locker room, and I really think that's a very appropriate metaphor for this. But indeed, this book is really about the intersections of our lives, and it's not what we say and what we do, but it's who we are, isn't it? And isn't this something we should learn from?
I think that, yeah, absolutely. I think that oftentimes we go so fast, or we forge onward with such intent that we don't always pause to think about why we mow the yard like we mow the yard. Why do I make my bed like I make my bed? Why do I interact with my spouse the way I interact with my spouse? Well, probably it goes back to someone who we modeled our behavior after, or someone who we admired, who tried to teach us that the grass isn't finished until you've swept it off of the street where it went when you were mowing it. I mean, there are just such little things, such important little big things, I should say, that make us who we are, that we glean from others. And my hope would be that when people read this, whether they're a basketball coach or a CEO or a mom or a grandma or whatever, that it would make them pause to think about the people's lives that have intersected with theirs, the people who have helped them become who they are, people who have shaped them. Because I think that gratitude bone, if you will, is maybe the key to a whole lot of ills that we face these days. It's impossible to be anxious and worried and wound up when you are completely and wholly grateful. And that's what I hope this book can do, is provide that gratitude lens through which we can look.
Yeah, take that pause, right? And just
Yeah.
look around and say to yourself, like when I get up in the morning, I have an exercise that I do before my meditation. I list seven, I don't list it literally, but in my mind, 7 things that I'm grateful for. And I do this with athletes too. And then after I say these 7 things that I'm grateful for, and you're one of them today, by the way, I feel a very elevated emotion. And I take that emotion and I say, you know what? I've been given a lot. Now, Jerry, get off your butt, go out there into the world and give the world, make it a reflection of everything you've been given. And what a wonderful day it is when I do that.
Yeah.
You
How
know,
the,
and my worst days are like when I don't do that.
there's no question. I used to keep a gratitude journal, a physical one that I began keeping when my kids were little, and I got this giant job at the University of Oklahoma. I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter, my second child, when I got this giant job. And so it was this huge architectural reconstruction, if you will, of this program. And I had a almost 4-year-old son and a brand new baby daughter. And my days, as you might imagine, were full to the brim. And so the gratitude journal that I kept was my way of sort of making sure that the most important things didn't get buried underneath all the troubles, trials, and tribulations of the day. Because when you're building a program pretty much from scratch, there are lots of trials and tribulations and adversity. And so it was my way of just kind of flipping the script and remembering what I had to be so grateful for. Through the years, I would keep that religiously for a while, and then I would float away from it. And then I would go back and I would keep it again, and I would kind of float away from it. And so I have these bound gratitude journals in a drawer in my bedroom, and there are these little gaps. Sometimes it's a few weeks, sometimes it's 6 months. And I can always look back to those as times when life wasn't quite as good when that was going on. And it wasn't because of what was happening in my life. It was about how I was viewing and digesting what was happening in my life. I didn't make the most important stuff the most important stuff. And I would kickstart myself and get back into it. And things would, lo and behold, be better. As you said, you just sort of set the pace for your day when you do that. And this book for me was like this massive year-long project of daily setting the day the way I wanted it to go, planning gratitude and working backward.
Yeah. That's awesome. Your story is an amazing one because you went from a high school coach straight to the University of Oklahoma, and I don't think that really happens anymore today.
No.
In any sport, certainly not women's basketball and everything. How did you go about doing that and keeping those things in balance? Because I think so many people in their careers, and it doesn't matter if you're a sports coach or a physician or whatever, like as a coach, you put your players first, and then comes your staff, right? And then comes and you get home and then like you try to give something to your kids, and then the last eke out, you give something to your spouse, and then at the end of the day there's nothing for you, right? And that's when people burn out. That's when doctors quit. That's when nurses quit, is that they've given so much. And I think what the gratitude thing does is it puts you on top. Like if I do this for myself, then I'm better. Then I can give more to my spouse. I can give more to my children. I can give more to my staff, and we can all be better for our players. Does that resonate with you? Or?
Yeah, the great conundrum that we stub our toe on is this idea that you can't give away what you don't have. And so if you're really trying to support people and encourage them and fill them up, and you are empty, you're going to fail at that miserably. So that process for me was, in a way, I guess, self-serving, in that I had to be able to get what I needed to take care of the people I was responsible for. But I had the unique, and I call it an unbelievable privilege, to enter the collegiate sports world at the time when I did. I was at the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. And all three of those things kind of had to converge. But to your point, it would not happen now. Salaries at that time were not astronomical as they are today. The platform at that time was not as large nor as bright as it is today. There are lots of factors that make that such a different world than the one we live in now. But I got in right at the cusp of the explosion of women's basketball. Connecticut had won their first title. ESPN was down the road in Bristol. We were just about to have this huge tipping point where women's basketball grew large. It was the first year of the Big 12 conference. I remember we had a television contract in which every team in the league, all 12 teams, had one home and one away game televised. And the legends in our conference, Jody Conrad, Marsha Sharp, Seal Berry, Marion Washington, I could go down the list. They were absolutely on cloud nine about this. Like, this was huge. It's not just going to be Tennessee and Texas on TV anymore. It's going to be all of us in the Big 12 Conference had this platform. So it was just this really exciting time in which to build a program and to kind of get in on the ground floor of the explosion of what was going to occur for women's basketball over the next 25 years.
Well, I just want to say, Jerry, before you jump in, and we're recording this 2 days after the women's final, Iowa, LSU, incredibly exciting Final Four. I think shattered all the viewership records. You know, scalping of tickets into the multiple hundreds of dollars or $1,000 tickets, like sort of, you know, I don't want to say, and I was reading this from Europe, so I maybe I miss pieces, but it seemed to be a lot of sentiment of like women's basketball is finally getting the respect it deserves, but we're still not there yet. 2 years removed from, you know, the bubble Final Fours where the women got one weight bench and that whole disaster.
Yeah, I think your point is fair, and I think it's fairly accurate of what I've seen publicly here in relating to not just the championship game, but the Final Four. I think the entire tournament had more intrigue than it's had in the past. Who knows what to attribute that to? You know, we feel, for whatever reason, so tied to attributing things to factual experiences. We don't really know exactly what to attribute that to, but there was a culmination of styles of play, which is not something I've seen across the spectrum in women's basketball. There were teams that played really fast and shot quickly, and teams that lock you down, and teams that go inside like South Carolina, and teams that spread you out and play with 5 guards. You just got to see a whole bevy of styles of play, which was really interesting and exciting. There were new personalities that emerged, which was interesting. The quality of play was really high, really, really high. And I don't think that's getting talked about enough. Not just in the championship game, but leading up to it. Some really, really, I was watching the men's game last night, and it was almost halftime, and I was like, are they going to get to 20? And you know, and it speaks to the physical, fundamental, sound defense of both of those squads playing in the men's championship. Right. But at the same time, man, we like to see the ball go in the basket. And the women's skill level, their ability to put the ball in the basket at a really high rate, is magnetic to fans. And so it was, I think, a huge step. I don't know. I don't remember the exact number, but you're correct. It has shattered viewership. ESPN released their numbers earlier today, and it shattered viewership numbers of the past. And I think it's a springboard. I don't think it's here we are, and then we drop back down and kind of go plateau for a while. I think we're still going like this, and this was maybe just the watershed moment.
Yeah, and I think what was beautiful about it, I mean, and maybe the intrigue was, right, UConn got knocked out, Stanford got knocked out. Like, we were losing our top seeds earlier in the tournament than ever before, which created this sort of amalgamation of styles and things. And then, of course, South Carolina losing in the semifinal as well. So yeah, it was super exciting. Jerry, sorry, I'm monopolizing.
No. It's a great conversation. And I'm a hoop head, so I love talking basketball. You know,
I love hoop heads.
Yeah, a hoop head. You know, that's it, right? You got a game going on, I'm going to watch it. I don't play it though, not anymore. But yeah, you know, so I just want to sort of maybe shift gears on this a little bit. Maybe give you a chance to maybe teach us something. I mean, we're learning as we listen to you, but you have something that you've taught your athletes, and I just want to go back into your book and talk about the system. You had a system, I guess I'll call it, that can really help all of us, I believe. And the system was your way, your personal way to access players' thoughts by how they felt. Now, let me just preface it with this. In my work, it's all about feeling. You know, 20 years ago, working with athletes, I would get them not to visualize by imagine yourself playing. They had to feel what it was like when they were playing their very best. And so this really intrigued me. And why don't you help us understand that? Because if you could, if this could be maybe a tool for other coaches to use, because once you get your athletes to feel the way they want to be, the high elevated emotions. I have this expression that says, from feelings equal function. So how you perform on any given day. That's why waking up, circling back to the gratefulness thing, waking up feeling grateful, that's my feeling. I'm going to function that way all day. And so you have this, I'm calling it a system. It might not be a system, but could you help us understand that a little more? Is there something that you did to create that way? I mean, coaches have a hard time getting kids to talk about their feelings and how they feel.
Well, it takes time. And that's, I think, at the top of the list. We always, fans want it, administrators want it, coaches want it, players want it to happen fast. We want to win immediately. We want to get good in 2 weeks. And those things don't happen. Neither do the types of relationships that are required to be able to access players' feelings. They don't happen within a few days or a few weeks. They happen over time. It's sincere acts over and over and over that open that conduit for sharing. But I think we did some things intentionally. Like one of the things that I did for years and years and years, after games, I would pass out a piece of paper that my assistant coach created very simply. And it would have the opponent and the score of the game at the top. And then it would have a couple of columns. It was called post-game thoughts. And it's what went well and why, and what can we do better and how. And I created those as a means of trying to make sure that the next day's practice started at a place that made sense to both of us. Because sometimes a coach will finish a game and think, oh man, we've really got to work on this. And a player won't even see that. They'll be thinking about something entirely different. And so in the reflection of our performance, I wanted us to arrive at at least a similar starting slope. And so that's originally why I began to do that. But I found quickly that what I learned from those post-game thoughts was way more about what they were feeling than what they actually understood about the game. I could look at a piece of paper and know if a kid was frustrated, angry, thrilled, overconfident, distracted. I could tell by the handwriting on the page before I even read the words. The way it was written, the amount that was written, the slant in the writing. After a while, I guess it's the old public school teacher in me, I could just tell. And then when I would read what they wrote, it would be so clear that the lens through which they saw the game that we had just witnessed together and experienced together was sometimes so dramatically different from the one I had watched. I would be like, what happened here? And it gave me like a little cheat sheet. It gave me a little backdoor in to where they were and what they were thinking, and thus could grow conversations around things before they became either obstacles that couldn't be removed, or before we became such on different pages that we couldn't find a commonality, a place to begin. It really became just sort of one of those windows where I could access where they were, what they were thinking, how they were feeling, and it gave me sort of a recipe of what to do about it.
But it also,
go ahead,
I'm sorry,
Jerry.
John. Yeah, but maybe I'm reading into this, but I would imagine it also gave those athletes, by asking them the question, after, let's say you lost, you had a loss, and everyone's frustrated, everyone's disappointed, blah, blah, blah. But by asking them the question, like, what went well, what was good about the game, and then you get to what needs work, right? But what you're teaching them something that's really important in my way of looking at things, because you're opening up the possibility for them to feel good about what the heck they did that was well, that did go well.
And likewise, the opportunity to dissect what could have been better, even though they had success. And so my hope was that somewhere within that is the idea that the journey, the process for getting to this outcome really does trump the outcome. Because there are times in which we would win a game and there wasn't really that much stuff that went well that we had anything to do with. The other team
Yeah.
just missed a bunch of shots, or they got in foul trouble, or whatever.
Yeah.
And by the same token, sometimes the flip would be true. And so it helped us realistically gain information. You know, athletic competition is so emotional. We're emotional humans. That's part of our makeup. So it's everything we do is wrapped in that. Those questions were sort of designed to say, put your emotion right over there for a minute, and let's do a debrief of what really did happen. Like what's factual, what's the information, because that's what's going to help us get better as we move forward. And very rare was the occasion that a player would say, we didn't do anything well, nothing went well, this is awful, you know, we should blow the whole thing up and start over. Most of the time, they would at least be able to come up with something. And I remember one particular player, she'd had multiple knee injuries, was around for a long time. And in her 5th year, I remember her saying, well, I thought we handled the adversity provided by the refs extremely well. And it just made me laugh out loud, because that was the one thing that she could find that we had handled well in that game. But it sort of teaches you to find what can be beneficial in whatever the circumstance is.
Well, I think it's so important. And a quote that I share often on this podcast is the American football coach, John Madden, who said, winning is the best deodorant. Right. And that, you know, when we win, oftentimes the things that stink get masked. Right. But oftentimes, as when we lose as a coach, we can be hypercritical. Right. And we can dive into it too much. And so getting that sort of hot review from your players right after, right? And then you taking the time later to sort of read it and digest it, and then let the emotions cool, and then teach. I think it's a really cool tool. Now, what I'm curious is, how often, this is kind of a 2-part question. How often did you read what they wrote and be like, no, 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 you're missing the big picture, right? And number 2, how did that change over, you know, the long time that you were a coach? I think of myself as the young coach thinking, you know, no, you are all completely wrong, and this is how you'd fix it. And as, you know, 25 years later, now going, okay, I didn't look at it that way, but a lot of you see that way. So maybe this is my opportunity to learn as well.
Oh, certainly. I got better at having more purposeful and more accurate comments as I got older. My fundamental absolute deal with myself was I would write on every post-game thought something back to the players and then return it to them. If I'm going to ask them to give me feedback and take the time to do that, then I'm going to also return that. And so sometimes it would give me a chance to say, you know, you're looking at this wrong. Look at all the things you did do, and let me go back and say that in this, what went well and why, and what can we do better and how. It was team and it was individual. So we had a little line drawn under each question, because you have some players that don't play. They didn't get in the game. Well, I don't want or need a synopsis of the game. I watched it, as did you. What is there inside there, and what could you do better, even though you didn't get on the floor? And those would sometimes be some of the most insightful, beautiful things that players would write, in that they felt responsible. Maybe a walk-on who doesn't even get in the game, I could have been better in warm-up or in the locker room. I saw this coming and I didn't have the courage to say anything. And next time I'm going to do this. And those were just beautiful moments about their connection and their investment in what was going on. I did have to fight with my English teacher, red pen. Boy, I wanted to correct some spelling and some grammar sometimes. And I tried to really put those red pens away and write in some other color when I write on this. But that kind of became a running joke with players as well. But
well, especially as the text lingo has gotten into the way that kids write,
oh yes,
you're like,
oh
what
yes,
is that? What does that
yes.
say?
Don't know that word. Yeah. So, but the back and forth response was super important in saying, I hear you. I'm listening to what you say. Maybe I respectfully disagree, or maybe you make a beautiful point that I hadn't thought of, but just that communication, they really wanted that and they needed that. And it became an important part of our repertoire.
I know John and Sherri, gosh, you're bringing up such an important aspect of good coaching, great coaching. I know there are coaches out there listening to this and saying, you know what, Sherri, yeah, that's nice. That's all well and good for you to do. But quite honestly, I can't afford to take the time to do that. To which I say, you can't afford to not take the time to do that. I mean, the dynamic that you're creating there is you're giving them ownership, responsibility, reliability, working together, communicating between coach and athlete, where the coach, you actually become the teacher, and they're teaching you. You become the student, and they're teaching you what you need to know as the coach to be a more effective coach, don't you?
No question. No
Right?
question.
And so coaches out there, all of you listening to this is pivotal. You know, I don't think we've ever attacked this before in our podcast, but I see this as instrumental in creating what John and I teach all the time, which is the importance of the relationship game. You could win the championship game, but if you're not winning the relationship game, you'll never get to the championship game. And so this is an amazing system and a way of doing this. I'm so glad you're talking about it.
You know, when you mentioned that about you can't afford to not take the time to do that. I used to ask myself at the end of every season, what is the one thing that I know if I did more of, we would be better from? Without fail, in 25 years, the answer to the question was the same: more one-on-one time with players. That's it. I mean, you want to make your team better, you want to make your program better, spend more time with your players, get to know who they are, what they think, how they feel. And yet, especially in the world of recruiting and the world of cell phones, where you're constantly talking to someone's coach or trainer or parent or athlete, what's happening in the future can overtake what you're trying to do in the present. And through the years, I toyed with all kinds of systems. I always wanted it to be organic, you know, like I'm meeting with my players regularly, and I use meeting softly. Maybe we're going for a walk, maybe we're going for ice cream, maybe we're sitting in the office, maybe I'm rebounding for them, but we're quote unquote meeting. I always wanted it to be organic, but I found that as you try to do that, the kids who are struggling, having problems, are difficult to reach, they end up getting all your minutes.
Yeah.
And you have anything left. And you look up and it's been 4 weeks since you had a conversation with the kid that's always early to practice, always picking up the balls, always cheering on her teammates, never complaining. You haven't had a conversation with her outside of the court because life and recruiting and issues and fires have gotten in the way. So I would create this system in a little journal where every player's name was there. And when I spent that quality time with them, I'd zip a check mark in there so that I could look at the end of the week and go, I haven't talked to Carolyn. I got to talk to Carolyn. I got to make sure I spend some time with Carolyn. And it kind of kept me honest. And I wasn't always great at it. I tried very hard at it, but I wasn't always great at it because so many things happen. But as a head coach, we oftentimes think, you know, the assistant coaches need to take care of that. Those players need the head coach's blood. They need your attention. They need to know you. They need to know that you want to know them. That's critical. And so at the end of every year, that was always on the top of my to-do list: spend more one-on-one time with my players every year.
I think
in my living room, I have the 4 agreements on the wall. Don Miguel Ruiz, don't take things personally, don't make assumptions, always try your best, be impeccable with your word. And it sounds so simple, but the reason I need it on my wall is because it's so incredibly hard to do.
Yeah.
And so this was the same kind of thing. Like, I know I need to spend more time with my players, but I had to remind myself and put it on top of a post-it on my computer and keep a journal about it because it's really hard to do at the rate you need to do it at.
Yeah, and I think it's important as that head coach that you are, and everything's different, right? Basketball, you might have 14 or 16 players, and lacrosse, you might have 40, right? And so it's a different take, but I think as that head coach, being proactive about that, because it's amazing. Like when I go in with teams, right? And the seniors, the captains, they'll come and go with the coach's office, have a conversation every day. But the freshmen are like, I'm not going in there. It's like going to the principal's office, right? They're afraid. And yeah, you make deposits and you earn the trust and whatever, but you got to open that relationship. And sometimes it takes the adult or the coach to open that relationship. And Jerry, just as Sherri was saying that, I was thinking when we had Steve Kerr on, he was talking about how aware you have to be in those conversations that player number 1 on your team has very different needs than player number 14. And he was talking about the NBA. He said, what did Steph Curry need? He needs someone to protect him from the media and all the obligations and everything who are trying to steal his time, to say, just play basketball, go home and have dinner, make sure you save time for golf. And he said, number 14 on the bench is this my last contract? Am I going to be out of the league? Very different things. And Steve talked about how, since he was a reserve most of his career, he was very, very cognizant, or is very cognizant of the life and the mentality and the mindset of the people who aren't your star players. Any thoughts on that?
Well, what I think is remarkable about that in particular is what a masterful job Steve Kerr has done with Steph Curry, who maybe was not exactly, I mean, Kerr had his moments for sure. Don't get me wrong. We all know that as an NBA player, but he wasn't the Steph Curry on his team. And I think it's always easier for us to relate to those who are walking a path that is familiar. I was a way better point guard coach than I was a post coach, because I played the position. I know the emotions that you carry. I know the responsibility that you carry. It was easy for me to get inside of that moment with point guards and say, I know how you're feeling right now, and here's how I can help you handle this and navigate it. So I think what he's done that's masterful is figuring out how to handle the star who life comes at very, very differently. But all of our teams are made up of individuals whose homes are entirely different. Think about, you're a high school coach and you've got a kid who, when I was a high school coach at Norman High, I had kids who had 4-car garages and got a brand new, name it, Porsche, whatever, when they turned 16. And I had kids who I had to pick up in the morning for school and take home after practice, and who didn't see their mom or dad until 10 o'clock at night. Very, very different experiences coming into that locker room. And because of those experiences, often very, very different needs, which begs the point of why you have to get connected with those kids to know what it is that they really need to be able to be their best selves.
Amen.
Yeah, connection is an important word right there. And it takes time. And your system that you develop is definitely a connective system. And I remember asking Steve Kerr one time, I said, so you just won the 2015 World Championship. What was the most important game that you ever won that year to get you that championship? And without a hesitation, he didn't even think about it. He said, Jerry, that's easy. It was the relationship game. And that's what we're talking about here. And the other thing I want to point out as I'm listening to you and learning, Sherri, is that, yeah, you might be a point guard and you can't relate to the post. And we're using basketball, but this is appropriate for all sports. I mean, we could talk soccer, we can talk lacrosse. It's going to all be relative. So I know with different coaches out there. But if you're a point guard and you relate to the point guard because that's the position you played, what coaches need to know is, don't forget those positions that you didn't play. Focus in on what every single athlete out there craves and give them that. And they crave connection. They crave caring. They create love. I mean, it was Phil Jackson who said, without love, I would have never won one of those championships. Right. And so these are the things. I don't care whether you're Gen Xers. I don't care if you're born in 1927. Whenever you play, you crave the same things. And I want coaches who are listening to us to take that away as well, and to understand that what you're doing really will facilitate them in giving them what they crave.
I think you can also machinate some situations that that spur that kind of empathetic experience on. We used to turn our guards and posts inside out. In other words, posts get out on the perimeter, you're going to feed the guards. Guards are going to post up. And it was, I used to call it feel my pain drill. It was, because guards are, like, hold her off. You can't catch that. And the post guys are like, can you not please throw that away from the defense? She's over here, throw it over here. And when you flip them around, then you're like, oh, this is hard. And some of the best conversations that I ever heard my team have were in practices and days and weeks following that little drill that I would throw out there, when they would get maybe a little snarky or a little blamey at one another. Then let's see what it feels like to do the other's job. And those always seem to stimulate conversations that left the court and were about where you came from and what makes you comfortable. I like being a press conference. Oh my gosh, I start sweating when I have to go to a press conference, and why, and just these differences that you have. Those really meaty, substantial conversations often stem from that little drill that we did. So you can create those things, those opportunities for your team. And I don't think they're as natural. Those conversations are not as natural now. They're much harder to get to than they were years ago, because we're seemingly so connected and literally not connected at all. It's all superficial. So much of it is fake. So you have to chop away at all that stuff that separates you, but it can still be done through intentional planning. It can still certainly be done.
It's amazing.
That's amazing. Thank you for saying that.
It is amazing. And I think I was just going to say, we're the most connected society ever. I mean, I was just telling you, I just got back from Spain with my kids, and it was wonderful. This place we were outside of Barcelona, we kind of stayed in a hostel for our training camp, and the hostel had rules, which was no phones at the table, no phones in the rooms, right? Like, you're supposed to connect, be human or whatever. And we had to walk 20-25 minutes each way to the field, back and forth. And I made the time, but as you're saying it, not enough to have one-on-one conversations with kids on that walk. I would walk with them and have the chat, but I'm like, oh man, there was a lot of walks that I didn't take advantage of, which I should have, because in that 20 minutes, I could have gotten so much more insight into a kid. So I wish we had this conversation 10 days ago, but oh well. I think this is one of our jobs now as coaches, is we look at the reality of the young people that we're coaching and say, what do they need from us? Because if coaching is all about relationships and all about connecting with a human being in front of you, then sometimes what they need from us is permission to disconnect from social, disconnect and have a conversation, learn how to have a difficult conversation face to face and not electronically and things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Very difficult for kids today. Very, very difficult. Confrontation is difficult. Vulnerability is difficult. Empathy is difficult, unless it's on a stage, unless it's, projected. But the real kind that moves you emotionally and makes you think long after a conversation is done, that doesn't happen often enough. And that you were talking about maybe missing some opportunities when you were walking back and forth. It made me think of my experience in USA basketball at the World University Games. We were in Kazan, Russia, and we were in an Olympic village. They had taken a couple of apartment complexes and surrounded it with a large fence, brick wall, and that was our Olympic village. And I remember we would all go to the cafeteria, and it had, all these stations of different kinds of food and from all over the world. And there were athletes from a myriad of sports. It wasn't just basketball, from all over the world. And often there was a language barrier, but some of the conversations that we were able to have, because your phone didn't work in the mess hall. You couldn't take it with you. It didn't work. And you have time. What else are you going to do? You don't have a TV. What are you going to do? So you talk. You talk. And I learned so much about other cultures, about individuals, about customs, about the commonalities that athletes share, regardless of their sport and regardless of their culture. And I had a phone at my disposal or a screen, I probably would not have done that. And so we have to provide those opportunities for our athletes. And I never was a big proponent of take their phones, put them in a box, and here we go. We're going to go to dinner. it would be more of an explanation of why we needed to do that. Now let's use our time wisely that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point about what they need, our job as coaches is to meet them where they are.
Mm.
When I was teaching high school English, if a kid had a 7th grade reading level, I'm not going to be able to teach them King Lear. I'm not. It's not going to happen. There's some great lessons and some great things to be taught from King Lear. If a kid has a 7th grade reading level, those are going to dissipate. We're going to be lost in translation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so much better served to go where they are and help bring them forward in creative ways, in intentional ways, in ways that don't prevent those in the classroom who can swallow King Lear from swallowing King Lear. But our job is to recognize the individuals that we have responsibility for, and to, as much as is humanly possible,
Mm-hmm.
meet them where they are, because that's the only way we can take them where they want to go.
Mm-hmm. And that's coaching, is to coach the person, not the sport, and to coach the individual within that team context, so that you're taking them all to a place they haven't been. And that's the challenge of coaching as well, because even on Oklahoma, you have your top player and you have your 14th. You have your future WNBAer and someone who might never get on the court at Oklahoma, but you need to make them all better. And I think this is where sometimes coaches just give up on the bottom and focus on the top, or they're so focused on the bottom because they can't read King Lear that the top gets bored. And that's the art of coaching.
My first year in the public school classroom, my mentor at school, I was teaching senior English. She said, I'll never forget, we were she was walking out of the classroom my first morning, and she turned around and she said one more thing. She was quite a bit older than me and had probably 30 years coaching experience or teaching experience. One more thing. Be careful of spending all your time on Joey when Sam is just sitting there waiting to be taught. And she walked out the door. And it stuck with me forever that while our job is to meet them all where they are as best they can, you hit on it earlier, it's within the team concept. It's within my classroom. So you have to find a way to teach to the group while individually touching as many as you can. And that might mean you put your arm around a kid between a drill. It might mean you walk by her as she's running back to the line. It might mean that you write a handwritten note and stick it in her locker before practice the next day. But I think you have to die trying to reach as many in a very personal way as you possibly can.
I'll let Jerry take the next question, since he too was a high school English teacher, and now I feel like I'm out of my league.
I didn't teach King Lear, by the way, because the classes that I had, none of them would have grokked any of it. But nor myself. I was one day ahead of each student of each class. I stayed one day ahead. That was about it. But so reading through your book, I came across this quote by Nelson Henderson. OMG. It's like, if this doesn't speak to what we need to be doing and how we need to look at things, nothing does. And he said so brilliantly, the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. Wow. What a mouthful.
Yeah. Leave it better than you found it.
What would you like to tell us about that quote and why you picked it?
I just think that coaching, teaching, parenting is not necessarily about things that we might get to see within our lifetime, whatever that is. It may be that we just throw a little pebble out that sends a ripple that makes it so much better for someone down the road that we may not ever even know. You have to operate with that belief that I can't win every battle every day. Someone asked me at a speaking engagement just last week about the difference between, like, what were my championships in the classroom? I had championships on the court, what were my championships in the classroom? the great thing about the classroom is that it didn't have to end in a win or lose every day. It didn't have, there wasn't a scoreboard that was tallying things up. It was a to be continued, to be continued. I kind of won, I sort of won, I almost won, based on all those kids who are in your stead every day. But if you kept a scoreboard and you tallied all that, at the moment, you might literally be despondent because you did everything that you felt you were humanly capable of in an hour's classroom, and you reached 2 of 22 kids. Like 22 kids were actually with you, and the others were hanging out the window and drawn upside down on their, it was just all kinds of stuff. And if you literally tallied that into win-loss columns every day, you might grow despondent. So Nelson's quote to me is, don't measure it by that. Measure it by little morsels that you're throwing out that may not even take root and grow for weeks and months and years. Yeah. But measure it by the difference that you can make cumulatively by what you try to do.
And how about just the planting of the tree itself?
Yeah, rarely do we ever see it get to grow.
But just the process. I'll go out to my garden and I'll put a plant in, and I don't have a green thumb, and the thing will be dead in like 3 weeks, right? But that moment that I was out in the garden, I felt such a sense of peace that I rarely feel, and quiet and contemplative time. And so the planting of the tree itself, I love this quote, and the ramifications are so vast for the way you're teaching. And
peace and purpose. That's what you get when you plant. Peace and purpose. Peace and purpose.
Peace and purpose.
That anything, we need anything more,
Yeah.
Let me ask a question, because I 100% resonate with that. And I guess now at 51 years old, I've been coaching long enough that I get those random phone calls or LinkedIn now these days from someone I stopped coaching 10, 15 years ago, who just say, hey, you were such a huge influence. And I haven't heard from them in 15 years. But then I often think back to the moments we butted heads. When, if they were asked in that moment, hey, what do you think of John as a coach? They'd have been like, fire that dude immediately. Right. And so I think we live in this dangerous world right now where everyone's a Yelp reviewer and a Google reviewer and judges. And we're asking kids to rate their coach or rate their teacher in the moment, but you don't know, because they don't see the tree growing either. It's only 10 years later that they go, that's what she was talking about, right? And life has to hit them in the face a couple times before they see it. And so I think that's one of the greatest challenges that today's coach, especially college coaches, live with, is that our students are sort of no longer our students, but maybe our customers. And if the customer's always right, sometimes it's really hard to teach. I'll throw that to you, Sherri. Oh no, she disconnected.
I saw her go.
I did too. I thought my question was so stunning. I can't hear you yet.
I don't know what happened. I'm looking outside and it is kind of weird out.
No, it's not a tornado.
You just disconnected or something. Where did I get?
I hope it's not a tornado. What were you saying?
I was talking about, I can try to I can try to talk about that quote. And I mean, I was watching you and you weren't moving, and I thought my question was so stunning that you just weren't even reacting to it at all. So my question again, and I don't even think I'm going to edit all this out because this is great, because this is the reality of podcasting, is, so many times people don't appreciate the lessons in the moment, and they don't see the tree growing. And we live in this age right now where we're treating students and student athletes as customers and not students to be challenged, right? The customers to be catered to sometimes. And yet, when we're trying to plant trees, that we know aren't going to grow for a while, that's telling people difficult truths sometimes. And they only appreciate those truths 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later. And I think it's very, very difficult to be a coach right now, especially on the collegiate level, because when you push, even with great love, sometimes people aren't ready to hear that. And when we're asking kids to rate their coach or rate their professor in the moment, a lot of times those ratings aren't that good.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. I think it's a very challenging time. And I think we're on a slippery slope when we turn a student into a customer.
Mhm.
They're involved in the process with us. We are learning together. We are experiencing together. And I think it's crazy because everything that is fantastic about sport, the aspects of life that it mirrors, you can just screw it up royally in sport and learn, and then not screw it up when it really matters in your life. And that's when it's like, okay, this makes sense.
Mhm.
This is fantastic that I learned this on what felt like a giant stage at the time, but was really small comparatively.
Mhm.
Those experiences, that's what makes sport what it is. That's what makes it such an important piece of the fabric of our society. And yet, when we turn our athletes or our students into customers or clients, then suddenly that special something, that little yeast that makes the bread rise in the whole equation, is nullified.
Mhm.
And when you take that out, you don't get the good that comes from the experience. So we have to be really, really careful. That's why I say it's a slippery slope, that we're not, by trying to appease, taking away the very purpose that it holds within our societal structure.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
none of us, none of us, I don't care how old we are, I'm older than you are, we don't always recognize the really important stuff that's happening to us when it happens to us.
Mhm.
Even when we're in our 50s or 60s, it takes a little time, and
Well,
maybe,
70s.
Mhm.
yeah, it's that, what is, I don't know, I'll mess up the quote, but life is lived forward but understood backward. Like,
Mm.
sometimes you got to get down the road and look back to go, I get it now. You need
Mhm.
that vantage point, and I don't know that that's, I mean, that's just a part of human nature. And
Mhm.
so when we deprive kids of the vantage point of letting lessons ruminate, we deprive them of the experience.
Mhm. Yeah. I was telling we were at a really nice restaurant when we were in Spain, and I was telling someone I appreciate restaurants when there's no salt and pepper on the table. And you're like, "Can I have salt and pepper?" Like, "No." You're getting that. "Can I substitute potatoes?" "No." And then it's like, okay, the customer's not always right. And if the customer doesn't like it, the customer can go someplace else. And there's something about teaching and coaching that the best of the best say no salt and pepper for you today.
Absolutely. What a great lesson for us all to learn, right? Not always
Exactly.
exactly how we want it.
And not
Welcome to
always.
life.
Welcome to life, and maybe try something new today. Awesome. Well, any other final thoughts? I want to, and then also a moment of people how they can get this book or go to your website, how they can best follow your work today. But anything you wish that we had asked you and we didn't, or any final thoughts for our listeners?
No, just the one thing that I would say is that I hope that this book makes you think and feel. That's the reason that I write. I want to kind of nudge people to go, and pause for a second and experience and remember and recall, because I think our best learning is done in reflection. And so if it if the reading nudges you in the ribs, a little elbow to the ribs to slow down and think for a second, then my mission is complete. I feel absolutely thrilled with what the book has done.
So,
Um,
so this book has done that. And I'll tell you how I know. It's like, it's a book about life. It's a book that uses sport as a vehicle, but your real message in this book is how to live a better life. And then if you choose athletics, then you'll be the best version of yourself as an athlete or coaching or whatever you choose in life. And that's what I got out of this book. And I want to thank you, by the way. Um, you sent me, you put this in the book, and that means a lot to me as an
Hmm.
author. I love personal cards and so forth. And that told me right away, I got to meet this woman. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your kind words about the book. It really was a labor of love, an opportunity to chase a passion that had been in my pocket for a long time while I was being the head coach at the University of Oklahoma. So I'm having a blast doing that, and hope to write some more, and who knows what they'll look like or feel like, but I hope that they'll always do the same thing, that they'll whatever I write will nudge people to think and feel.
The book's everywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, and hopefully support your local bookstore. And the website is just your name, SherriCoale.com as well, where that's where they can find everything about you. So
Yeah, not
this was
only
a
that, but go to the website, because I did, and I'll tell you, I learned so much. It's like educational. It's like you're teaching people on your website.
Oh,
You're not
that's
getting away from it. There's so much. There's a lot of video. There's a lot of instructional things, and so I learned a ton from that. So if you want to go further, the website is definitely a
I also
vehicle to.
write a weekly blog that is carried on my website, and you can subscribe to it. It's free. It's called A Way of Life, and I write about whatever catches my attention, whatever I notice. And I love the broad spectrum, the wide open canvas that provides, and I'm enjoying doing that weekly. So you can access that at sherricoale.com as well.
Awesome. Perfect. Sherri, thank you so, so much for being on the Way of Champions. We truly appreciate it.
Oh, you guys are great. I really, really appreciate the direction you came at it with and the depth of conversation that we had. I always judge how a podcast goes by how much it sits in my mind when we're finished. And I'm telling you, this one's going to resonate for a long time. So thank you guys for the questions you posed. And again, back to where I started, for the good that you do, the service that you provide for coaches, athletes, and others. Really appreciate it.
It
Thank
means a
you.
lot. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you so much. Whew, Jerry, that was pretty awesome, wasn't it?
Well, I'm overtaken by her genuine, authentic, vulnerable, all those things we want to teach. That's her. That's who she is. And she was teaching as she was talking in a way that I could hear it and learn. And she got the message across. One thing in particular that I love is her practical post game session that she has with the kids. I mean, John, I mean that's it in a nutshell. So many coaches, I don't have the time, I have to get home. I got to do this, I got to do that. But if you do it, you'll save time. And if you connect with your kids like that, your athletes, if you go on and you make sure that they understand that, yeah, it was a loss, but we're better because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll be open to listening, they'll be open to doing and going the distance, they'll feel respected, they'll feel valued, they'll feel important, all those things that you want your athletes to feel. We need to take the time, and she made that really clear, and you can't afford to not take the time to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I loved about this was she gave some great sort of 30,000-foot ideas, and then that one really concrete tool, like everyone could do that after their next game.
Yeah. How about the
Right.
kitchen, huh? What about
Yeah,
that?
the kitchen, I love that, and just this, the kitchen is a symbol of, a sacred place where you strip away all your
Yeah.
pretenses and you get
Yeah.
vulnerable and you get to the root of who you are as a human
Yeah.
being and as a team, whether it's your family, whether it's your basketball team, and then you start building again in those
Yeah.
difficult moments. And then I love this. I just the idea that one of the things I wrote down was, as she said, as her season debrief, what is one thing that I wish I did more of this season that would have made a difference? And every time it was more one-on-one time with kids. And I think that really hit me hard when she said it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because I think of my own coaching and all the other things that, pull you away from that. And I would say that I'd be shocked if anyone listening to this wouldn't say something similar. I've never
Yeah.
met anyone who say, you know what, I spent too much one-on-one time with my
Yeah,
athletes this
yeah,
season.
yeah. Yeah, let me validate that even further. I mean, I've had the wonderful fortune and opportunity to work with 12 Hall of Fame coaches over a period of time, and other coaches that were great too that didn't get recognized as Hall of Fame. But every one of these coaches that I work with and talk to, I always ask them the question that she asks herself, which is like, so next year coming back, we're gonna have another season. What would you do differently? And every one of them to a T. All the Steve Kerrs, the Quinn Snyders, the Anson Dorrances, Cindy Timshaws, all of these great coaches, they're all saying, need to spend more time with the players, need to give them more time, more attention. And when I do, I notice a difference on the court or on the field or in the pool. And so, John, you and I are here doing this podcast. It's fun for sure, but also we're in the business of education. And I think all the coaches listening out there to this need to really, really understand how important it is and how it resonates with you and I, and how important it is in terms of, forget the scoreboard, that will be affected by it, but man, your life will be so much more joyful and so much more valuable, and your message will be listened to, and the athletes will go the distance. You've got to spend more time with them. Just ask them how their mom's doing. The mom might be in the hospital. Hey, I heard you just got a new puppy. What's that like? You know? Oh man. Yeah.
No, love it. Well, as we sign off here, speaking of Hall of Fame coaches, everyone get signed up now for the Way of Champions Conference, August 4th, 5th, and 6th. Super excited about that. We're now have a live stream option as well through our friends at Championship Productions. So you can sign up for that. You can watch it if you can't make it live, but trust me, try to make it live, because it's just it's a game changer. We're getting so many big groups. Well, you and I love it, right? When people say we're bringing 5 coaches or we're bringing 10 coaches, because that's what makes the impact, is not just, hey, Jerry comes and he goes back and he says, hey, I had this great thing, and everyone looks at you like you're nuts. Like 5 of you, 10 of you go, and and you come back and you say, this is what we want for our athletic department. This is what we want for our program. So take advantage of that group discount and bring your staff, you know.
This is not just a conference, John. It's beyond conference. I don't know. I've been around a long time, and I've been to many conferences. This is not, and you and I came together to do this for this reason, to make it a different conference. And you'll never experience something like this. It's life-changing. If you want to have changes in your life, I have to add that, because a lot of you, my life's cool, I don't need any more changes. Well, that's fine too. But it is a life-changing experience. And John, you and I work at that to present that and make that possible.
Amen to that. Well, speaking of Hall of Fame coaches, Phil Jackson's going to be teaching with us this year, which is pretty awesome. And
I still have to talk to Steve. He's in the middle of his season, and I'm going to do that pretty soon.
Yeah, so we're trying to get him too. You just spilled the beans on that one there, Jerry. We're recording this, so maybe Steve Kerr as well. We'll see everyone. So get signed up. Just go to changethegameproject.com, click on Way of Champions Conference, and sign up. Jerry always forgets when we're recording, which is what I love about him. So anyway,
I'll say just about anything to get attention.
He'll say just about anything. So thank you all for listening. Remember, your influence is never neutral. So go out there, change the world, make a difference, and we'll be with you again next week.